They are just two of hundreds of over 60s who are now going off to Gambia, not just for a holiday, but often in search of love.
In 2025, a story exploded in the UK press. The headline goes, "British grandmother marries young Gambian lover and loses everything." The woman was in her 60s. On a beach in the Gambia, she met a man 30 years younger. He called her the love of my life. And for her, lonely and invisible back home, it felt like a miracle. She posted TikToks.
Oh, you're really tall.
Yeah, I'm very tall, yeah.
I just met this man, and he's really nice.
Yeah.
And he wants to take me out for a date, but I'm not sure. Tell me what you all think.
Yeah.
He's lovely though, Billy boy.
Billy boy, I love you.
She wore the smile of someone reborn. Their relationship moved fast. They even got married.
Abraham's down on one knee and he's asking me to marry him. It's a lot to take in. Yes, I will. Yes, yes. Oh, Abraham, that was my surprise.
Thank you for accepting.
You're very welcome.
It got everyone around her worried, so they had to warn her. Come on, this has to be a scam. But she was convinced otherwise.
A lot of English people, they cussed me down and they called me a visa vagina and called me a sex tourist, and they was really nasty and I didn't like it.
You're not there to tell sex story. You are a good person in Gambia here. We appreciate you so much. The good thing you are doing, we appreciate you so much.
I have to tell them to stop that.
Then finally came the truth. He already had a wife and 3 children. As soon as he arrived in the UK, he disappeared, along with her lifetime savings. This made the headline in the UK, but it's happening all the time on the beaches of the Gambia. Like women in their 60s or 70s fly in from all over Europe, pouring their life savings into what they thought was love, only to be left with nothing but broken retirements. Yet together, they've built what you could call an international romance market.
What is the truth behind that? You know, did you abandon your family?
No, not at all. I've got 3 children that were under 16. The holiday was planned for 3 months.
There are so many cases piled up that it became a national scandal in Britain. The tabloids gave the country a new nickname, Granbia. It means the Gambia of grandmothers.
It's paradise. You could have a different man every night.
For the Gambia, more and more sex tourism was swallowing the industry, and with it, the country's very identity. The Gambian government had to do something. So Director General Abubakar went public and said, "What we want is quality tourists. Tourists that come to enjoy the country and the culture, not tourists who come just for sex." The government could make statements, sure, but they didn't answer the real question. Like, how did paradise beaches turn into a stage for shattered love and survival? At first, I thought, well, it must be about money. That's usually the case, right?
A poor guy, you understand? I don't want to marry to a poor Gambian.
But the deeper I dug, the more I realized it's far more complicated than that. After seeing the broader context, I still wonder, if I were in their shoes, could I have done differently? And can anyone actually find a true love on these beaches? Let's find out. Today in the Gambia, there are young men known as Bumsters. They roam the beaches, approaching foreign women, and believe it or not, even among them there's a different social class. From the elites at the very top, to the guys barely scraping by at the bottom. But to understand this strange world and hierarchy within it, we need to take a look at the Gambia's economic story. Only then can we properly make sense of this world. The Gambia is the smallest country on mainland Africa, with a population of only about 2.8 million people. Its land area is just a little bigger than Delaware, and still much smaller than Connecticut. And if you pull up a map, the shape is odd. It stretches like a narrow finger into Senegal's territory, as if another country had been tucked inside Senegal itself. But this bizarre border wasn't an accident. Portuguese explorers were actually the first Europeans to set foot here in the 15th century. From then on, the Gambia was tied into Europe's world and soon became a hub of the Atlantic slave trade. For centuries, people and resources were drained from this land and shipped across the ocean. In the late 19th century, when European powers were carving up Africa, Britain and France simply sat at a table and drew a line on the map. Local people protested, but their voices didn't matter. And that's how this strange border came to be. The result was too simple. The Gambia ended up as a British colony, while Senegal went to the French. From that point on, the two neighbors were set on completely different paths. For nearly 5 centuries, the Gambia was under European control, first as a hub of the Atlantic slave trade, and later as a British colony. And finally, on February 18, 1965, it gained independence.
For the thousands who had come to Bathurst, it was an historic moment when the Duke handed the constitutional instruments of independence to the Prime Minister. After that formality, the people let themselves go, rejoicing in their traditional ways.
After its independence, the Gambia adopted a presidential system in 1970 and finally became a republic. But independence didn't mean prosperity, because the economy had already been broken under colonial rule, and it stayed that way. When Britain abolished the slave trade, what was left for the Gambia was peanuts. Just like the American South leaned on cotton after slavery ended, the Gambia threw everything into peanuts once the slave trade was gone. By the late 19th century, over 90% of the country's exports were peanuts. The entire nation had quite literally become a peanut republic. Even after independence, the Gambia's entire economy still ran on peanuts. And the problem with a one-crop economy is obvious. It's way too risky. Just like farmers in the American Midwest rise and fall with the price of corn or soybeans, the Gambia's fate could swing wildly on nothing more than the price of peanuts. In fact, in the 1970s, peanut prices collapsed, and with them, the Gambia's economy fell apart almost overnight. Families couldn't afford school fees, so kids were pulled out of class. Even a simple cold could turn deadly because medicine was too expensive. Imagine this. Your paycheck is cut in half, while the cost of living doubles, or even triples. That was everyday life in the Gambia. And to make it worse, most people had little formal education. There was no real foundation for building new industries or finding another way forward. So in the end, the Gambia may have won independence, but it was a country with no real way to feed itself. And then, an opportunity showed up from the unlikeliest place. In 1965, a Swedish travel agency was asking itself a question. European winters are so miserable. Isn't there somewhere warm, not too far away and not too expensive, where people can escape to? The first tour group of 300 people arrived. And honestly, the whole thing was kind of a joke. There were hardly any hotels, and service was terrible. But here's the surprise. People actually liked it. Why? Because the Gambia had all the basics. Warm sunshine, sandy beaches, and quiet stretches of coast. On top of that, Europeans at the time had this odd fascination with what they called unspoiled Africa. The idea of this experiencing the real Africa was a powerful draw. So those first 300 visitors quickly multiplied. Soon, the number of tourists hit 25,000, and it was the Brits who loved it most. A flight was only about 3 hours, and the prices were unreal. To give you an idea, what you'd spend for just one night in a Las Vegas hotel could cover a whole week of hotel, food, drinks, and pretty much everything. As a bang for your buck holiday, it was unbeatable. But ironically, the boom in tourism didn't really make money for the Gambia itself. Sure, a few hotels popped up along the beach, but most of them were owned by foreign investors. So whatever money tourists spent just flowed straight back out to overseas companies. For local people, the best they could get were low-wage jobs like carrying luggage, cleaning rooms, maybe waiting tables. Tourism was growing, but the actual benefits, they weren't landing in Gambian hands. And the type of tourists coming in didn't help much either. Most were middle-class retirees, not luxury travelers. They weren't here to splash cash. They just wanted a cheap, quiet place in the sun. It's the same vibe you see with retirees on cruise ships. The whole trip is about keeping costs low. And for the folks flying into the Gambia, it was exactly that kind of budget holiday. The Gambia had more tourists, but it was a strange, almost empty kind of growth. And to make matters worse, the flow of visitors was unpredictable. One year the beaches were packed, the next year they were nearly empty. For locals, that kind of uncertainty made it almost impossible to start a business. Will they even come back next year? No one could answer. So investing felt more like gambling, a risk poor families simply couldn't afford. For ordinary Gambians, tourism became more of a dream than a livelihood. It promised a lot, but didn't put food on the table. Then, in the 1980s, a shift began. European travel companies started paying serious attention to the Gambia. Their idea was simple. Why not sell everything together? The flights, the hotel, the meals, all in one package. In other words, the classic all-inclusive package holiday. And what did that mean for the Gambia? For the first time, a steady and predictable flow of tourists, year after year. After so much uncertainty, it finally looked like a reliable stream of income. The government also moved fast. They officially designated tourist development zones and opened the doors to foreign investment. Soon, souvenir shops, restaurants, bars, and local tour guides began to appear. In the early 80s, it was mostly small travel agencies selling Gambia packages. But by the late 80s, the entire game changed. The world's very first package holiday company, Thomas Cook, entered the scene. At the time, Thomas Cook wasn't just a travel agency. They owned hotels, resorts, and even ran fleets of airplanes. Having them move into the Gambia was like a town of mom-and-pop stores suddenly getting a Walmart or a Costco. While small agencies could bring a few thousand visitors, Thomas Cook alone could bring in tens of thousands. This wasn't just more tourists. It was a complete shift in the rules of the game. By the mid-90s, political instability did cause numbers to drop, but thanks to UK, the momentum came back stronger. By 2000, annual tourist arrivals had reached 100,000, and in just a few years, that number climbed past 120,000. At that point, the Gambia was no longer just a niche getaway. It had become a go-to holiday spot for British retirees. But here is the irony again. Life for ordinary Gambians didn't really improve. Why? Because the big tour agencies were selling almost everything as all-inclusive packages. Flights, hotels, meals, even the airport pickup, all covered. For tourists, it was incredibly convenient. You could land in the Gambia and barely have to open your wallet. But this convenience came at a deadly cost to the local economy. Since everything was paid up front to a foreign company, the money never actually circulated in the Gambia. Economists have a term for this: economic leakage. Whatever cash tourists spent just flowed straight back out to overseas investors and operators. That convenience for the tourist killed any reason to spend money in local shops, restaurants, or markets. And for Gambians, shut out of the package system, they barely had opportunities. The package deals were just too perfect. Everything was included, except one thing: human connection. And that was the gap young Gambian men stepped in to fill, roaming the beaches and approaching senior women. At first, it was all so small. A British granny on holiday, sitting alone on the beach. A young Gambian man walked up, smiling. Nice weather, isn't it? Just small talk. But to her, it felt like destiny, a romance straight out of Netflix. Back then, no one imagined this could ever grow into an industry. On the surface, it looked like love, but underneath, it was lost youth and sheer survival being traded. And soon, more and more young men flooded the beaches. Taxi drivers, bar owners, even hotel staff got involved, connecting them to tourists. The quiet holiday town had turned into something else entirely: a hunting ground for opportunity and survival. By the late 1990s, the young men on Gambia's beaches had earned a name: Bumsters. Originally, the word meant beggar or vagrant, but here it came to mean something very specific: young Gambian men who followed European women along the sand. Here is the interesting fact. Even among the Bumsters, there's a hierarchy. Not every guy wandering the beach is in the same class. At the very top, you've got the so-called professionals. These are the elite, with multiple sponsors, sometimes even homes in Europe. Yes, houses in plural. Somehow they manage to juggle several passports, offshore bank accounts. At that point, they're not just bumsters anymore. They're basically running an international business. Then you've got the middle class. These guys stick with one steady partner and get long-term support. It looks like a relationship, but in practice, it's more like an overseas direct deposit system. Monthly payments, gifts, sometimes even a visa sponsorship. For them, patience and grit are the real weapons. At the bottom are the ones barely scraping by. Every morning they show up at the beach, pacing the same stretch of sand, waiting for a chance. But most of them never get chosen at all. They're left standing in the sun, watching someone else's life move forward. So even the bumster world has its own pyramid. Luxury at the top, bitterness at the bottom. And eventually, the government had to step in. They put out statements, tightened security, and even tried steering foreign investment in new directions. But here's the problem. In the Gambia, there isn't really another industry to fall back on. For a poor country, giving up tourism would be the same as giving up survival. And then, even faith itself got dragged into the debate. I mean, this is the Gambia, a country where almost everyone's Muslim, and everyone knows the rule. Sex outside of marriage? Yeah, that's a hard no. No ifs, no buts, end of story. But here's where it gets complicated. Even some of the local imams started to speak up. They said, Islam is also a religion of mercy and understanding. If these young men are doing this to feed their families, who can say how Allah will judge them? It's kind of wild, right? At the root of it all is one simple fact. The Gambia has never had the strength to feed itself. When peanuts collapsed, it clung to tourism. When tourism proved unstable, the strange industry of bumsters took root. Today, the Gambia desperately needs solutions, but the cold reality is that every morning, countless young men still head down to the beach, some dreaming of turning their lives around, some hoping to find a second youth. And right now, on these shores, yet another transaction is beginning. The question is, will there ever be a real solution?